Keeper league is where you're going to keep X amount of players. And this is a little bit easier than Dynasty because you don't have to work the long game as much. You don't have to worry about, the drafting your rookies now, getting them lined up. And I'll get to Dynasty here in just a minute. Starting off, you're looking at the scoring system, okay? And I used to not care. We had our C&D podcast draft yesterday, and I was just talking about this with some of the league mates there in that league. I used to not care what the scoring system was, and I used to really not care what the roster selection was. But over the last few years, I've changed my mind. I used to think, well, if it's half-point PPR, then it's half-point PPR for me, and it's half-point PPR for the rest of the league. That's true. But it's also, you have to be a little bit more self-centered and okay, what can half-point PPR do for me? Tight end premium, which is a big time, it's blowing up here, just to make tight ends, which are, you all who listen to my show know how much I love the tight end position. It's making them a little bit more relevant. So if you're working with a 1.5 PPR in the tight end premium league, it boosts the tight end position a little bit, and it makes them a little bit, more relevant. So you have to look at what PPR and what half-point PPR and 1.5 PPR can do for yourself. Not worry about, okay, it's the same for the league. Sure it is. But, okay, if it's a tight end premium league, then that makes the tight ends a little deeper. And you're thinking, well, maybe I should think about keeping a tight end, especially if you've got one of the top 5 or 6, and as one of your keepers. Okay, the scoring system is big time. If you only have a 4-point passing per touchdown for a quarterback, and you got 6 point per touchdown for everything else, then you're not really interested in keeping a quarterback. It does change a little bit if it's a two quarterback league, but normally keeper leagues, not really 2 quarterbacks or super flex, but they are evolving into such. Most single quarterback leagues are becoming a thing of the past. They are starting to move into super flex or 2 quarterbacks, and that's kind of the way we've been moving into it over the past several years. I still do play in several leagues where there are just 1 quarterback, and probably always will be. But if you're playing in the league, let's say it's a 1 quarterback league, and your passing touchdowns are only 4 points, then you're not keeping a quarterback. You can get one later. You're keeping the players that are going to score touchdowns, running backs, wide receivers, because they're getting 6 per touchdown. So it's all about the scoring system. And then you're looking at, okay, what do I got that can work for me in these 1 to 5 keeper slots? And, if quarterbacks get bumps or they get bonuses for running in touchdowns or something like that, then it changes the game. But the most important thing you can look at is the scoring system. And like I said, didn't always think that, but now I do. Because the scoring system works the same for everybody, but it also works for you. Starting roster selection is huge. This was a big-time issue in the C&D Podcast League last year. Before you draft, and this really goes across the board, from redraft to dynasty, everything in between, you look at who you're starting. You look at who starts every single week. Okay, I felt like I was taking candy from a baby in that league last year. I only lost 1 game the whole entire season, walked through the playoffs, won the championship, because I drafted very well. That league is a super jacked up point system. It was a 2 starting quarterback, and you had 2 super flexes, so you could start 4 quarterbacks in that league last year. It has since been dialed back. There were some people who really weren't happy with the setup, and we dialed it back to just 3 quarterbacks, and you could only keep 1 out of your 10 keepers that we had yesterday. So it put a whole bunch of quarterbacks back on the board. So that's the first thing I looked at was scoring system, and then I went to see what the roster configuration was. And when I saw that there was 4 quarterbacks, I kicked my strategy around with our friend Brian Wickham on Twitter at bwick50. You can find him. He's a fantastic fantasy mind. You can ask him anything. He'll get back with you and let you know. And we started kicking strategy around, and we both were talking about, well, just take quarterbacks. Take quarterbacks until the quarterbacks are gone. And I did. And there were people that had one or two quarterbacks, and you could start four, and they were hurting. Now, that being said, they all learned their lesson last year, and the draft we had last night this league is going to be way more competitive this year because people learn from their mistakes. So to me, it was like taking candy from a baby last year. This year, it's going to be a little bit of a different animal. But you have to know those two. If you know those two things, the scoring system and the roster breakdown, that's half the battle. That is half the battle right there. Then you can get maybe your first or one or two guys that you want to target in the first or second rounds, and then after that, let the draft come to you. Also, in a 1 to 5 player keeper league, if you keep four running backs, okay, unless the steal of the draft falls to you in the first or second round, say you're drafting in the 8 slot, and for some unbelievable reason, Dalvin Cook or Christian McCaffrey fall to you at the 8 spot, you taking them. But if you've kept 4 solid running backs, you want to go someplace else with your first round pick. Grab a wide receiver. Because if everybody's kept the running backs, then wide receivers are going to be, very plentiful, and you need to grab one of those guys. So that's a little bit of strategy for Keeper League. Let's go on to Dynasty, and this is where it gets a little bit different because your strategy changes and you start playing the long game. Before I move into Dynasty, I want to say one more thing about Keeper Leagues. I don't target rookies in Keeper Leagues as early as some do because this is not really playing the long game. You're wanting to win right now in Dynasty or in Keeper Leagues. You're still playing for this year. Okay, if you draft a rookie and if you draft a rookie in the 5th round of a keeper league, and he doesn't, really pan out, then you've wasted that spot, and you're not going to keep him next year anyway. That whole focus changes when it's Dynasty. So we shift to Dynasty. What's the first thing you do? You look at A, you look at scoring system, and B, you look at roster configuration. And then once you do that, then you start to formulate what you got. Now, if you're already in a startup, if this is a Dynasty startup, and you're starting one from scratch, awesome. They are fantastic. A Dynasty startup is just like, oh my gosh, I can't get my team filled up fast enough to see who I've got. And you start drafting, and you got a couple of guys that you're really looking at, and you get 1 or 2 of the guys you really want, and then after that, you got to let the draft come to you. We're going to jump ahead from the startup to a Dynasty redraft. Back that up. If you are in a Dynasty startup and you want to take your chance and play the long game with some rookies, okay, there is a round, and I can't say what round it is because that's entirely up to you. There is a round where it is okay to start drafting your rookies to take a shot. Now, to me, in a Dynasty startup, it's not the 2nd or 3rd round. Okay, it's a little bit later than that, unless there's a guy that you just absolutely have to have, and you don't want him on your team, you want him on your team, and he's not going to be on anybody else's. That's the way to go. I did that with Dalvin Cook. He was going to be on my team, wasn't going to be on anybody else's, and I didn't care what I had to do to give that up to get him. I get it. But to play this out normally, and to be like, okay, I want to play this out, and I want to do this the right way, there's a round that I would put in my head, in a Dynasty startup, as to where I'm comfortable taking, a Jamar Chase, or a Trevor Lawrence in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league. Trevor Lawrence is going to be a higher commodity than he was going to be in a 1-quarterback league, even in Dynasty. 2-quarterback leagues, his stock goes up, and he's going to be taken sooner for sure. But you have to determine, and I can't do it for you, because what's my strategy that I like might not work for you. Part of it might not. I say all the time, take what I give you, listen to other people, take what they give you, and then kind of formulate your own thing and say, hey, I'm okay with taking Trevor Lawrence in the 5th round. If he's there and he falls to me in the 5th round, I'm taking him. And then by George, you do that. You take him, and that's cool. And, hopefully he hits for you this year. Same with Zach Wilson. Trey Lance is a little bit of a different animal because there's still a Jimmy G factor there. Okay, I'm not sure it's going to be training camp, getting that all together. And even if Trey Lance wins the job, he might be on a short leash because he's a rookie. So you have to play in the factors. But it all still starts with roster configuration, point system, and then you have to look at what you've got and your team needs. And a lot of times, best player available is not a bad thing. But if the best player available is a running back and you're really looking good at running back, okay, maybe it's okay for you to go ahead and take a wide receiver, or vice versa. Maybe the best player available is wide receiver, and you're like, well, I got 6 stud wide receivers. I need to go someplace else. And then you do it. And that's playing the long game, and it's perfectly fine in Dynasty because if you want to take a chance on Rondale Moore, or you want to take a chance on, Elijah Moore, who I think has the greatest hands in the NFL draft this year. I think both those guys are going to see work as rookies. I don't think they're really going to start to pop until year 2, year 3. Both those guys are undersized. But I was talking to Kane Harder, who does the voiceover for the show, and he was saying that maybe the NFL's transitioning to smaller receivers. And, if you look around, he has a point. There's not a lot of 6'6" receivers in the NFL anymore. They're short, they're twitchy, and with hands like Elijah Moore has, man, it's hard not to like that guy. But if you want to take a chance to play the long game, that's what you do. And then as your draft goes on, depending on how many rounds it is when you're redrafting your dynasty league, you're going to look at your configuration. And if it's an IDP league, it takes on a whole nother realm. Because now you're looking at, okay, when do I start taking defensive players? And most of them in IDP redraft dynasty leagues are already gone. So then you are looking at your Micah Parsons, and you're looking at your Kwity Paye, and people that have been drafted high up and were big name people this year at the NFL draft. And you think, okay, I'm going to grab these guys, I'm going to stash them. Then I'm playing the long game. Perfectly fine to do in dynasty. But you have to know your league. You have to know your league. Every league's different. Okay, I'm in 13 leagues this year. 13 leagues, and not one of them is identical with another one. They all have different kicks and quirks and things like that. The last thing I want to talk about is fantasy diversity. If you're in multiple leagues, okay, and by multiple I mean more than like 4, okay, try as you're starting to drafts. Our drafts are ramping up here. Fantasy drafts are ramping up. The big ones are firing up. We're going to be drafting throughout the rest of this month and the biggest part of August through fantasy football. If you are in several leagues, try to be diverse. And this is hard for me. This is something that I'm trying to branch out on because I like a core set of players in the NFL, and those are the guys that I like to hang my hat on throughout the course of the season, and it happens year after year. I can't even tell you without really thinking into detail how many shares of Dalvin Cook I have, how many shares of Cam Akers I have. But those guys are both relevant. But yes, I love them because they went to FSU. But league diversity. Okay, don't put all your eggs into one basket. Last night in the C&D podcast draft, this is a perfect example. I had 3 first-round picks from trades that I had acquired last year. I had 3 first-round picks, and I had the 103, the 105, and then I had the 108. And I knew that I was keeping Josh Allen as one of my quarterbacks, but I had to give up Kyler Murray. Yes, I had them both last year. So I thought, well, depending on what happens at the 101 and the 102, if Kyler Murray drops back to me, I'm going to take him at the 103. Sadly, it did not happen. He was taken at the 102, which dropped Lamar Jackson to me. Throughout the course of Lamar Jackson playing in the NFL, I've only had one other share of him, and that was when I drafted him in our Devy League as a rookie, and I ended up trading him after his rookie season. So I have never had a share of Lamar Jackson up until now,